I watched my daughter through the window of the clinic's waiting room, her hands moving with the kind of quiet confidence that still surprised me sometimes. 22 years old, second year of nursing school at Dalhousie, and she still worked 12 hours a week at the walk-in clinic on Barrington Street doing intake, filing, whatever they needed. The Halifax wind was brutal that February, the kind that comes off the harbor and cuts straight through you regardless of how many layers you're wearing. I stood there for a moment before going in, just watching her. Her name was Sophie. My daughter, my whole world since her mother, Lynn, passed when Sophie was 6. 16 years of just the two of us, figuring it out as we went. My phone buzzed, my older brother Kevin's name on the screen. "You're still coming Saturday, right? Mom's 70th. "Of course. Sophie and I will be there around 5. There was a pause. I know that pause now. I didn't then. About that, Sandra was hoping it could be more of an adults-only thing this year. You know how she gets about the house when there's a lot of people. Sandra, Kevin's wife of 7 years, her family had money going back 3 generations, old Nova Scotia money, the kind that built half the waterfront properties in Chester and never let you forget it. Sandra had grown up with a housekeeper and a seasonal cottage in the Annapolis Valley, and the particular brand of manners that exists specifically to make other people feel small. Sophie is 22, Kevin. She's not exactly going to be running through the halls. I know. It's just Sandra's having some of her clients over. The Devereaux couple from the South Shore. Big investors. She wants the evening to go a certain way. What's wrong with Sophie? He didn't answer right away. That pause again, longer this time. She works at a clinic, Daniel. Sandra's worried it might come up. These people, they have a particular idea of. She's in nursing school. She works to pay for it herself. I know that. You know that. Then say it to Sandra. It's complicated. I looked through the window at my daughter handing a folder to an elderly man, smiling at him the way she always smiled at patients, like they were the only person in the room. She had Lynn's face, Lynn's instinct for people. We'll be there at 5, I said, and hung up. I didn't tell Sophie about the call that night. She was already excited. She'd found a dress at Value Village that she'd spent 20 minutes ironing, and it was hanging on her closet door with the kind of care you give something when you don't have the money to replace it. She'd saved up from Mom's gift for 2 months, a hand-bound journal from a local bookbinder in Dartmouth, something personal, something she'd researched and chosen carefully. Grandma's gonna cry, she said over pasta that night. The good kind of crying, I'm sure of it. She will, I said. Do you think Aunt Sandra will like the cheese I'm bringing for the appetizer table? She'd picked up a wedge of aged cheddar from the farmer's market, the good kind from PEI, not cheap, but she'd bought it with tips. I told her it was perfect, and I meant it. Saturday afternoon, we drove out to Kevin and Sandra's place in Tantalon, about 40 minutes west of Halifax. They'd built the house 4 years ago. Custom construction, Lakeview, the kind of property listing that uses words like curated and intentional. I'd been there a handful of times. It always felt like a magazine shoot that people happened to sleep in. We arrived at 4:30. I'd planned it that way. Sophie wanted to help set up, be useful, show we appreciated the invitation. The driveway already had 3 cars in it I didn't recognize. A Lexus, a Range Rover, a Mercedes that I later found out belonged to the Devereaux couple from Chester. I parked my Civic between them. It looked exactly how you'd expect. Sophie grabbed the cheese and Mom's gift from the back seat. We're early, we can help. The front door opened before we reached it. Sandra, she was wearing something cream-colored and expensive-looking, her hair done up in a way that required professional help. Her smile appeared in sections, eyes, cheeks, mouth, none of them quite synced. Daniel, you made it. She looked at Sophie. The look lasted a fraction of a second too long, going from the Value Village dress to the farmer's market cheese to the hand-bound journal wrapped in craft paper and twine. Sandra, the house looks wonderful, Sophie said. because that's the kind of person she is. Thank you. Kevin's in the living room, Daniel. Sophie. She tilted her head the way you do when you're about to say something you've already rehearsed. Would you mind waiting in the mudroom for a bit? We're just finishing the setup, and we've got guests with sensitive allergies. The clinic, you know. Whatever's on your clothes. Sophie blinked. I showered. I changed right after my shift. Of course you did. It's just, antiseptic has a way of lingering. In the fabric. You understand. Sandra's voice was completely pleasant. That was the thing. It was perfectly pleasant. It won't be long. Half an hour at most? There's a bench in there and I put out some sparkling water. The mudroom. Not the garage, not outside, but the mudroom, like she was a dog that needed to dry off. I opened my mouth. Sophie touched my arm. It's fine, Dad. Sophie? Please. Her voice was low. I don't want to make things awkward with Grandma's party. She took her gift and walked toward the mudroom. Sandra watched her go with that smile still in place, then turned back to me. Kevin's been asking about you. Second door on the left. I should have followed Sophie. I should have taken her hand and walked back to the Civic and driven straight back to Halifax and ordered buttered chicken from the place on Quinpool that she loves. I didn't. I don't fully understand why, even now. Some part of me thought I could fix it from the inside. Some part of me was still my brother's brother and couldn't quite accept that this was real. Kevin was in the living room holding a glass of wine, talking to a man in his 60s who had the comfortable, settled look of someone who'd never worried about a mortgage. Kevin saw me, excused himself, and came over with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent the last 7 years learning how to move through rooms like this one. Michael, good, he caught himself. Daniel, good. Come meet the Devereaux. Sandra put Sophie in the mudroom. He had the grace to flinch. It's just until. She's your niece. It's your mother's birthday party. I know that. He kept his voice down, one eye on the Devereaux. But Sandra's been working this partnership for 8 months. These people, they have very specific ideas about. About what? About people who work for a living? That's not fair. Where's Mom? Upstairs getting ready. The photographer's here in an hour for a portrait. Sandra organized it. I went and found a glass of water I didn't drink and stood near the window and watched the guests arrive. There were maybe 25 of them by 6 o'clock. Sandra's world, investment partners, real estate contacts, 2 women Kevin introduced as being in acquisitions without ever specifying what they acquired. They moved through the house with the unconscious authority of people who assume any room they enter was arranged for their benefit. I checked on Sophie twice in that first hour. She was sitting on the mudroom bench with her coat still on, the gift for Mum in her lap, the cheese wedge sitting unopened on the floor beside her. She had her phone out, but wasn't looking at it. The second time I came, she wasn't alone. Sandra's daughter from her first marriage, Brooke, 17, who drove a used Jeep that was still nicer than anything I'd owned in my 30s, had apparently opened the mudroom door looking for the spare bathroom and found Sophie there. Oh, Brooke said, not unkindly, just with the bored register of someone who finds a situation mildly interesting. Are you the nurse? I'm studying nursing, Sophie said. I'm your Uncle Kevin's niece. Brooke looked at her for a moment. Right. Mum mentioned you. She didn't elaborate on what Sandra had mentioned. She didn't have to. She closed the door. I went back a third time. 40 minutes later, Sophie had eaten the cheese. All of it. Not because she was hungry, I think, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She'd picked at the craft paper wrapping on Mum's gift and then smoothed it back down. We're leaving, I said. Dad, the party hasn't even. I know when it started. Grandma's not even downstairs yet. I can't leave before I give her the gift. I crouched down in front of her. She looked up at me, and I saw it then. What she'd been holding at bay for the past hour and a half. Her eyes were doing that thing they did when she was trying hard not to cry. That slight brightness, that deliberate steadiness. How long has this been going on? I asked. She looked at the floor. What do you mean? With Sandra, specifically, not just tonight. She was quiet. Sophie. She's not mean, she said finally. Not the way people are mean on purpose. She always finds a way to remind me of what I am to them, you know? She picked at a loose thread on her coat. Kevin's niece from Halifax, the one whose dad drives a Civic, the one doing nursing because she couldn't get into med school, even though that's not even why I chose nursing. That's just the story Sandra told everyone. When did you hear that? Christmas 2 years ago. I overheard her telling one of her friends on the phone. 2 years. I didn't want you to feel bad. I put my hand over hers. She'd been carrying this alone for 2 years because she didn't want me to feel bad. My daughter, who had worked every weekend for 6 months to afford a hand-bound journal for a grandmother who, as far as I knew, Sandra had also co-opted for her own social calendar. You listen to me, I said. Nursing is harder to get into than half the professional programs in this country. You know that. I know that. Dalhousie's program accepts 9% of applicants. 9. You chose it because you want to take care of people, and you're extraordinary at it, and no one in that living room could do what you do on their worst day. She almost laughed. Not quite. Okay, Dad. Finish the water. We're going in. Dad. We're going in, and we're going to find your grandmother and give her that journal, and we're going to sit at whatever table they put us at and eat whatever Sandra had catered and hold our heads up, because there is nothing wrong with us. We walked out of the mudroom together. I kept my hand on her shoulder. The living room was full now, the kind of full that has its own momentum and noise. Someone had put on soft jazz. There were caterers moving through with little plates of things, smoked salmon on blini, mini crab cakes, the kind of food that's designed to signal budget without actually being remarkable. Sandra was near the fireplace with the Devereaux couple, laughing at something the husband had said, her hand on his arm in that particular way, that's professional intimacy. My mother was just coming downstairs, 70 years old, still sharp, still herself. She'd made her own dress for the occasion, powder blue, something she'd sewn over 3 weekends in her kitchen in Dartmouth. When she saw Sophie, her face did the thing Sophie had predicted, the good kind of crying. Oh, my darling. Sophie crossed the room and hugged her grandmother for a long moment. I watched Sandra clock it from across the room, the look she gave the Devereaux wife. Brief, explanatory, something in it that said that's who I told you about. I saw the Devereaux wife nod with the microscopic sympathy of a woman who has never had to work and considers that a kind of virtue. We were seated at dinner. The table ran the length of the dining room. Sandra had clearly spent real time on the placement. Mum at the head, Sandra and Kevin flanking her, the Devereaux in the center, Sophie and I at the far end, beside the kitchen door. Close enough to the server's path that every time someone came through we had to move our chairs. I picked up Sophie's place card, moved us 4 seats toward the middle. Sandra appeared at my elbow within 30 seconds. Those seats are reserved. For who? The Beaumontchens. They're arriving late, they called ahead. Then they can have the seats near the kitchen. We'll be here. Daniel. Her voice had dropped, very controlled, very quiet. The seating was arranged very carefully. I see that. We've been carefully arranged near the dishwasher. The table had gone quieter around us. Not silent. The jazz was still playing, but the nearby conversations had dimmed the way conversations do when people sense something worth listening to. Kevin appeared. Daniel, maybe we should. I moved our seats, Kevin. That's all. Sandra looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that's a decision, and walked back to the other end of the table. The dinner was fine. The food was catered from a restaurant in Bedford. Good, not exceptional. The conversations at our end of the table were warm, actually. Mum talked about a quilt she was making, and Sophie knew enough about textiles from a craft project she'd done with her in high school to ask the right questions, and for a while it felt almost normal, like a real birthday dinner. Then Mrs. Devereaux, the wife, leaned across the table during a pause in conversation with the particular boldness of a woman accustomed to being listened to. "Sandra tells me you're at nursing school, dear. Good for you. My housekeeper's daughter did an LPN. Lovely girl." Sophie smiled. "I'm in the RN program. It's a 4-year degree." Of course. Mrs. Devereaux returned to her plate. The dismissal was complete and gentle and total. Brooke, Sandra's daughter, was sitting 2 seats down. She'd been mostly on her phone through dinner, which Sandra had tolerated in the way you tolerate things from people you can't actually discipline. She looked up now. "I looked it up, actually. Nursing school pays like 60 grand a year starting. That's not bad." She said it the way teenagers say things that they think are compliments. "Better than a coffee shop anyway. That's what Mum said you did last year." "I worked at a clinic," Sophie said quietly. "I still do." "Right, same thing, kind of." The table had gone genuinely quiet now. Even the jazz seemed to thin out. "It's really not," I said. Sandra set down her fork. "Brooke, sweetheart, working at a clinic and working at a coffee shop are not the same thing," I said. "In the same way that getting into a 9% acceptance rate program is not the same as buying your way into a school, which, as I understand it, is what happened with Brooke's acceptance to Armbray last year after the first application was declined." Sandra's face changed. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know that a substantial donation to the school foundation was made in February and that Brooke was accepted in March. Kevin mentioned it. He was proud of how Sandra handled it." I kept my voice even, not loud, just clear. "I also know that my daughter wakes up at 5:33 mornings a week for clinical rotations, that she hasn't taken a vacation in 2 years because she's saving for tuition, that she spent 2 months setting aside money from her clinic job, the clinic job, not the coffee shop, because there is no coffee shop, to buy your mother-in-law a birthday gift that she clearly put more thought into than anything else on this table." I stood up. Sophie looked up at me. "She has a 4-year acceptance rate that puts her in the top 10% of applicants in Atlantic Canada. She will graduate and work in hospitals and hold people's hands when they are scared and make decisions that actually matter. And she has done all of this without a trust fund or a family foundation or anyone donating a wing to smooth her path." The room was very quiet. "Daniel," Kevin's voice was strained. "You had a choice tonight," I said to my brother, not angry, tired mostly. "You could have put us at the table with the family and let your niece eat dinner with her grandmother on her birthday. You chose not to. Sandra chose not to. And I understand why. These people matter to you more than we do right now. Maybe that changes. Maybe it doesn't." I looked at Mum. She had tears on her face, not the good kind this time. "Happy birthday, Mum. Your gift is on the kitchen counter." Sophie picked it out. "It's beautiful." We walked to the front door. Behind us, I heard Sandra say something sharp and low to Kevin. I heard the Devereaux couple begin a murmured conversation about something else, the practiced social pivot of people who've seen scenes before. I heard Brooke say, "Okay, that was kind of intense," in the tone of someone describing a Netflix episode. We got in the Civic. I turned the heat on and sat there for a minute. "You didn't have to do that," Sophie said. "I know. Sandra's going to make Kevin's life hell for the next 3 months. Probably." She was quiet. "Then the Armbray thing. How did you know?" "Kevin told me at Thanksgiving. He was having his 3rd scotch and he was proud of it. The donation. He thought it showed resourcefulness." Sophie laughed. A real one, tired and sharp and genuine. It sounded like her mother. We drove back to Halifax. Took the 103 back across the bridge with the city lights coming up over the water. I put on the CBC radio because Sophie likes the night programming, some jazz call-in show that made no sense to me but she found soothing. Mum called that night at 9:30. "I want you to know," she said, "that I read the first 3 pages of the journal right after you left. Sophie wrote an inscription in the front. I don't know when she did it, but she did. I'm going to have it for the rest of my life. She didn't tell me about that. That's Sophie. I heard something shift in Mum's voice, something careful being set aside. Sandra means well, in her way, Mum said, but her way is very small. Do you understand what I mean? Her world is very small and she guards it very carefully, and anything that doesn't fit the shape of it makes her anxious. That's not an excuse. I'm not excusing it. I'm just telling you what I see. I know, Mum. Your father would have done exactly what you did tonight, maybe sooner. I didn't call Kevin, didn't reach out. I wasn't interested in managing the aftermath. Sophie had her exams the following week, and I drove her to the campus library twice and dropped off food and didn't ask how she was feeling because she hated being asked that during exam season. She passed everything. Distinction on her pharmacology assessment. Kevin reached out in April. A text first. Can we talk? I left it for 3 days. Then I called him back because he's my brother and I've known him my whole life, and there's a version of him that exists before Sandra that I still have some loyalty to. He told me the Devereaux deal had fallen through. Sandra's been devastated. It was months of work. I'm sorry to hear that. They found out there were irregularities in the zoning submissions on the South Shore development. Her business partner apparently falsified some of the documentation. She didn't know. At least that's what she's saying. The business partner, the one she'd been so desperate to impress at Mum's party, the one who'd apparently been in business with her long enough to be named on the joint filings. That's a serious thing, I said. It is. She may have to cooperate with the provincial review, her lawyer's involved. I didn't say anything for a moment. Is she okay? She's Sandra. She's handling it the way she handles everything. A pause. She's not the same as she seems. I know how that sounds. But she grew up in a family where your value was what you produced, how you looked on paper. She learned that young, and she never got the chance to unlearn it. Kevin, that's a description, not an excuse. I know. Sophie was in your mudroom for 1 hour and 40 minutes. He didn't say anything. She had her coat on the whole time. She ate the cheese she'd brought because she needed something to do. She overheard Sandra, 2 years ago, tell someone on the phone that Sophie couldn't get into med school. Sophie carried that for 2 years without telling me because she didn't want me to feel bad about my relationship with you. Kevin was quiet for a long time. I didn't know that. There's a lot you didn't know, because you weren't looking. He came to Halifax in May, not to the house. He called first and asked if he could take Sophie for lunch, just the two of them, if she was willing. I told him it was her decision. Sophie said yes, because Sophie is constitutionally incapable of refusing someone a chance to do better. They went to a fish and chips place on the waterfront that she liked. Nothing fancy. He listened more than he talked, she told me afterward. Asked about her program. Asked about what kind of nursing she wanted to do eventually. Really listened to the answers. He apologized. She accepted it with conditions, which I thought was exactly right. He would have to show up consistently. No more mudrooms. No more managed invitations. He has, mostly. He came to her end-of-year pinning ceremony in June, sat in the auditorium with a bunch of nursing students' families and looked slightly out of place in his blazer but stayed the whole time. He took photos after, sent them to me with a message that just said she's remarkable. Sandra wasn't there. Sandra and Kevin are still together, which I have complicated feelings about. She sent Sophie a gift card for Amazon after the ceremony, $50, with a card that said congratulations on your hard work. Sophie bought textbooks with it. She didn't mention the card again. That felt like the right amount of closure. The provincial review into the development filings concluded in late summer. Sandra's name was cleared. The falsified documents came from her business partner's office, not hers, but the partnership dissolved. The South Shore project was cancelled, and the Devereaux couple moved their investment portfolio to a firm in Moncton. 8 months of cultivation, gone. The world Sandra had worked to construct at that birthday dinner, gone with it. I think about Mum's party sometimes, about the mudroom and the craft paper wrapping, and Sophie smoothing it back down with her careful hands. About the specific arithmetic of what my daughter had sacrificed to bring something meaningful to a table she wasn't even invited to sit at. Sophie started her 3rd year in September. She's on a cardiac care rotation now. She comes home on weekends when she can, and we watch old movies, and she tells me things about the work that I'm not sure I'm allowed to repeat. The patients, the hard cases. She has her mother's way of talking about people. Not clinical, not detached, like each one matters specifically. She does a shift at the clinic on Saturday mornings still. Same one on Barrington. She says she'll probably keep it up through graduation, both for the money and because it keeps her grounded. Her words. I watched her leave the house for her shift last Saturday, her bag over her shoulder, the cold coming off the harbor already at 7 in the morning. She stopped on the front step for a moment, looked back at me in the doorway. Don't forget, we have Grandma for dinner tonight. I haven't forgotten. I'm making the lemon cake, she asked specifically. I know. She turned and walked up the street, shoulders straight, unhurried, like someone who knows exactly where she's going. I thought about standing in that driveway in Tontalon with the Civic between the Lexus and the Range Rover, about what it costs to walk into a room where you know you're not wanted and do it anyway with your head up, about the specific kind of strength it takes to stay kind when kindness is not what's being offered to you. She learned that from her mother. I just tried not to teach her otherwise. That's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about what happened and what came after. Not the dinner. Not Sandra. Not even Kevin choosing his seat that night when he should have stood up. What I keep coming back to is Sophie on that bench in the mudroom, coat still on, straightening the wrapping on a gift she'd saved 2 months to give. She never once thought about leaving it behind. I keep thinking about that craft paper, the way Sophie had picked at the corner of it and then smoothed it back down, careful, like it still mattered. Like the person it was meant for still deserved to receive it exactly as intended, regardless of where Sophie herself had been made to sit. That's the thing about character. It doesn't negotiate with circumstances. It just keeps going. I've turned that evening over many times since, and what strikes me isn't Sandra or the dinner or even Kevin staying in his seat when he should have stood up. What strikes me is the sequence of it. Every consequence in that story grew directly out of a choice someone made. Not fate, not luck, just choices, accumulating. Sandra spent months building a relationship with people she wanted to impress, and the person she chose to impress them with, her business partner, was the one who brought the whole thing down. She arranged a dinner to project a particular image of success, and the image collapsed because the foundation under it wasn't solid. You can manage appearances for a long time, you can't manage them forever. Sophie couldn't have known any of that would happen. She just kept doing what she'd always done, showing up, working hard, treating people with care whether or not they returned it. That's not strategy, that's just who she is, but it compounds. The same way dishonesty compounds in one direction, integrity compounds in the other. Quietly, without announcement, over time. I think about the 9%. 9% of applicants get into Dalhousie's nursing program. Sophie got in on her own, with a part-time job and no safety net, and she's been building something real every semester since. That kind of intellectual commitment, choosing a hard path because it's meaningful, not because it's comfortable, doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from years of deciding that understanding something properly matters more than appearing to understand it. It came, I think, from Lynn, who read everything and questioned everything and never settled for the easy version of any idea. And the other thing, the thing Sophie showed me in that mudroom that I'm not sure I could have shown at her age, is that staying decent when you're being treated indecently is genuinely hard. It costs something. Sophie sat on that bench for an hour and 40 minutes with her coat on and didn't say a word to anyone that she'd regret. She walked back into that dining room with me and held herself together in front of people who had already decided what she was worth. That kind of steadiness, the ability to absorb something unfair without becoming someone smaller because of it, that's not passivity. That's a form of strength I'm still learning from her. What I know now, more clearly than I did before that night, is that those three things together, the willingness to do right by people, the commitment to actually knowing what you're doing, and the endurance to keep going when the room isn't with you, those aren't separate virtues. They're the same thing, expressed differently depending on what the moment asks for. Sophie had all three in that mudroom. I hope I had at least one of them when I stood up at that table. She never once thought about leaving the gift behind. That tells you everything.